Johnny Carson read the Vietnam veteran's letter, and his hands began to tremble. He signaled Doc Severinsen to stop the music, turned to face the 300 people in the studio, and did something nobody expected. It was March 1978. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B at NBC in Burbank. Another Thursday night. Another monologue. Another audience expecting laughs and celebrity interviews and the comfortable rhythm of America's favorite late-night show. Johnny was in the middle of a joke about President Carter when he noticed the envelope on his desk. It hadn't been there during rehearsal. It wasn't on his cue cards. Just a plain white envelope with 3 words written in careful handwriting. For Johnny Carson. He paused mid-joke, picking up the envelope. The audience thought it was part of the bit. Ed McMahon leaned forward slightly, confused. This wasn't in the script. Doc Severinsen's band kept playing the bumper music softly in the background. Johnny opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded carefully. The paper was yellowed, worn at the edges, the kind of aging that comes from being carried in a pocket for years. He unfolded it, and began to read silently. The smile vanished from his face. His jaw tightened. His hands, steady through thousands of broadcasts, started to shake. Ed saw it first. "Johnny?" he said quietly, off microphone, but the studio mics caught it anyway. Johnny didn't respond. He was staring at the letter, reading it again, his eyes moving slowly across the handwritten words. Then he looked up at Doc Severinsen and raised his hand, the universal signal for stop. The music died instantly. The band members looked at each other, confused. In 17 years of hosting The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson had never stopped the music mid-monologue. Never. The studio fell into absolute silence. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. Johnny set the letter down on his desk carefully, as if it might break. He looked directly into camera 1, his voice steady but stripped of all performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I need to read you something. And I need you to understand that what I'm about to share is real. This isn't a bit. This isn't a setup for a joke. This is something that matters." He picked up the letter again, his hands still trembling slightly. "This letter was placed on my desk tonight by someone in our studio audience. I don't know who yet. But they wanted me to read this. And after reading it, I understand why." Johnny took a breath, steadying himself. Then he began to read aloud. "My name was Thomas McKinney. I was 19 years old when I wrote this letter in November 1967. I was stationed in Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam. I carried this letter in my pocket for 7 months until I was medevaced out with shrapnel wounds in June 1968. The studio was so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the stage lights." Johnny continued, his voice growing thicker with emotion. "I'm writing this because I need someone to know what we're doing here. What we're really doing. Not what the politicians say. Not what the news shows. Just what it's like to be 19 years old and scared and so far from home that you forget what your mother's voice sounds like." Ed McMahon had tears running down his face. The audience sat motionless. Johnny read on. "We tell jokes to keep from screaming. We talk about girls back home to remember why we're here. We make plans for after, college, jobs, families, because if we don't believe there's an after, we can't get through today. My best friend Jerry talks about opening a garage in Michigan. My sergeant wants to coach Little League. I just want to see my kid sister's 10th birthday. She was 5 when I left." Johnny's voice cracked. He stopped, composing himself, then continued. "If you're reading this, it probably means I didn't make it home. Someone found this letter on me and kept it, and maybe years from now, when the war is over and people can think clearly again, they'll want to know what it was like. Here's what it was like. It was kids trying not to die while adults argued about politics." The camera pushed in slowly on Johnny's face. Tears were sliding down his cheeks now, and he wasn't trying to hide them. "I don't want a parade. I don't want speeches. I just want someone to remember that we were here. That we mattered. That we were more than a policy decision or a casualty number. We were 19 and 20 and 21, and we should have been at football games and proms and figuring out who we wanted to be. Instead, we're here, and some of us won't make it back, and I need someone to know that we tried. We really tried. Johnny set the letter down again. He looked at the audience, 300 faces staring back at him, many crying openly now. This letter is dated November 12, 1967, Johnny said quietly. I did some checking during the commercial break. He held up a small piece of paper his producer had rushed to him. Private First Class Thomas McKinney died on January 23, 1968. He was 19 years old. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny stood up from his desk, something he rarely did during monologues. He walked to the front edge of the stage, closer to the audience. Whoever put this letter on my desk tonight, he said, his voice steady now but heavy with emotion. I need you to stand up. Please. I need to know who you are. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, in the back row of the audience, an older man slowly rose to his feet. He was maybe 50, wearing a simple suit, his face weathered and tired. Military bearing, even after all these years. What's your name, sir? Johnny asked. Gerald Patterson, the man said, his voice carrying through the silent studio. Jerry. I served with Tommy McKinney. I was the one who talked about opening a garage in Michigan. The audience gasped softly. Johnny nodded, understanding flooding his face. You were his best friend. The one he mentioned in the letter. Yes, sir. We were in the same unit. Tommy, when he got hit, I was right there. He gave me this letter before they took him out on the helicopter. Made me promise to keep it. Said if he didn't make it, I should make sure someone knew. Someone who could tell people. Why now? Johnny asked gently. Why tonight after 10 years? Jerry's voice broke. Because I've been carrying it for 10 years, Mr. Carson. And I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to let him go. And then I saw your show was taping tonight, and I thought maybe if I gave it to you, if you read it to people, then maybe Tommy would finally be able to rest. And maybe I could too. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny made a decision in that moment that would define his legacy more than any joke he ever told or any celebrity he ever interviewed. He looked at his director, Bobby Quinn, in the control room. Bobby, clear the rest of the show. Cancel the scheduled guests. We're doing something different tonight. The producer's voice came through Johnny's earpiece. Johnny, we have Burt Reynolds booked, we have. Cancel it, Johnny said firmly. All of it. Tonight is for Tommy McKinney. He turned back to Jerry Patterson. Sir, would you come down here? Would you join me on stage? Jerry hesitated, then began making his way down the aisle. The audience parted slightly, giving him room. When he reached the stage, Johnny extended his hand, helping him up the steps. They stood together under the lights. America's most famous television host and a Vietnam veteran who'd carried his best friend's last words for a decade. Tell me about Tommy, Johnny said quietly, sitting on the edge of his desk, abandoning all formal interview structure. Not about the war. About who he was. And Jerry talked. For the next hour, unprecedented in Tonight Show history, Johnny Carson gave his entire platform to this one veteran's memories. Jerry talked about Tommy McKinney from Duluth, Minnesota, who loved baseball and terrible jokes and his kid sister more than anything. About how Tommy could fix any engine and wanted to teach shop class after the war. About the night before Tommy died when they'd stayed up talking about what they'd do when they got home. He was scared, Jerry said, tears streaming down his face. We all were. But Tommy, he had this way of making you believe it would be okay. Even when we knew it wouldn't. Even when we could hear the mortars getting closer. He'd crack some stupid joke and for a second, just a second, you'd forget where you were. Johnny sat beside him the entire time, asking gentle questions, sharing the silence when Jerry needed to collect himself, offering his own handkerchief when Jerry's was soaked through. Ed McMahon never said a word. He just sat in his chair and cried with the rest of the audience. Doc Severinsen put down his trumpet halfway through and just listened, his usual flamboyant energy replaced by reverent attention. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. After Jerry finished talking, after the tears and the memories and the stories about a 19-year-old kid who died in a rice paddy 10 years ago, Johnny did something extraordinary. He walked to the edge of the stage again and addressed the audience directly. "How many of you served in Vietnam?" he asked. "Or know someone who did? Could you stand up for me?" Slowly, people began rising. First a handful. Then dozens. Soon, nearly a third of the studio audience was standing. Some were veterans themselves. Some were parents who'd lost sons. Some were wives who'd lost husbands. Some were siblings like Tommy's sister, who was now 15 instead of 5. "I want to ask you something," Johnny said, his voice carrying through the studio. "How many of you have been carrying letters like Tommy's? How many of you have stories you've never told because you didn't think anyone wanted to hear them?" The silence was absolute. "I want to tell you something," Johnny continued. "This country hasn't done right by you. We sent you to a war we couldn't explain. We brought you home to a country that didn't want to hear about it. We told you to forget, to move on, to stop living in the past. And that was wrong. That was cowardly. And I'm ashamed that it took me 17 years of sitting behind this desk to understand that." He turned back to Jerry, who stood beside the desk, clutching Tommy's letter. "Jerry, I want you to keep this letter. It's yours. It's Tommy's gift to you, the gift of knowing you didn't abandon him, even after death. You carried him with you. You honored him. I don't know how to let him go," Jerry whispered. "You don't have to," Johnny said gently. "You just have to stop carrying him alone." Johnny reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to Jerry. "This is the number for the VA's counseling services in Los Angeles. They have programs specifically for Vietnam veterans. You call them. Tell them I sent you. And if they give you any trouble, you call me directly. My number's on the back." The audience erupted, not in applause, but in that collective sound of 300 people releasing breath they didn't know they'd been holding. Johnny embraced Jerry, and for a moment, they were just two men honoring a friend who died too young. "I want to do something," Johnny said to the camera, his voice steady now. "If you're watching at home, and you served in Vietnam, or you lost someone in Vietnam, I want you to know, you're not alone. And you don't have to carry these stories by yourself anymore." He held up Tommy's letter one final time. "This letter will stay with Jerry. But its message, that these young men mattered, that they were more than casualties, that message is for all of us. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." The show ended an hour late that night. NBC got thousands of calls. Johnny received over 50,000 letters from veterans in the following weeks. He read every single one. Jerry Patterson kept his promise to Tommy. He opened that garage in Michigan. And framed on the wall, under glass, hangs the letter Tommy gave him in 1968. Johnny Carson never spoke about the war again on his show. He didn't need to. That one night, he'd given voice to thousands who thought no one was listening. And they finally heard what they needed to hear. You mattered. You still matter. We remember.